This is our second video ColemanNation podcast. If you're listening in the car, please default to audio. I don't want to have any responsibility for any untoward road behavior. Today, Allum Bokhari is going to be, and is, our guest. You can see him sitting right there. This is a guy who he's writing about my entire life. I'm just looking at the articles here, and it's just all the stuff that we're living with. Today's, 14 hours ago, Donald Trump to sue Masters of the Universe, Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg. We're going to have to talk about that because he did the press conference today. This is being recorded, of course, on the 7th, on Wednesday. Florida Rep. Anthony Sabatini. Anyway, Allum is an investigative journalist for Breitbart, Claremont Institute Lincoln Fellow, not to be confused with the Lincoln Project.
Definitely not. They're very different things.
And thank you very much for joining us and agreeing to spend a little bit of time talking about these topics of mutual interest. As you know, my focus is on, I think, what the book you just wrote, which is the is it a book? Did you just write a fairly recent book? And
yes, deleted. Big text battle to erase the Trump movement and steal the election, which I published in September, and then a few months later it comes true.
Imagine, it's like being a screenwriter for 1984. So we may as well start out with the news.
Yep.
I mean, the interesting thing about my podcast, and I'm sure you've assiduously listened to all the it seems as if I'm having it's a narrow topic, but it's everything.
It is everything. It's affecting every area of our lives. You can imagine a future in which your smart refrigerator won't let you access your groceries because you misgendered someone on Twitter. This is there are endless material for dystopian writers at the moment. But hopefully one of these lawsuits turn them around. But I don't really have high hopes for that.
Well, I have some high hopes for my lawsuits, but for the one that was filed today or announced today, I assume it was filed by President Trump, I would be surprised if too many people have very high hopes for that one. I do think,
and that's the one I was specifically referring to. just so we're clear, it seems like this lawsuit seems to follow the same lines as other lawsuits that have failed, and it's not really the fault of the lawyers or the arguments they're making. It's the fault of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And Florida, I think, dropping the ball on doing a better tech law in their state, because Trump is a Florida resident. If they had a strong tech law, his lawyers could have taken advantage of that, but they don't. Most of it got struck down by this federal judge. They could have done common carrier or public accommodation, and they didn't. Just for common carrier and public accommodation are types of businesses that are very much restricted in who they can or cannot deny service to, and it's perfectly within the jurisdiction of states like Florida to categorize businesses as such, but unfortunately they didn't do that in their tech bill. So yeah, I think this Trump bottom line is I think this Trump lawsuit is probably not going to be successful. Obviously it'd be great if it was. I do think it'll have a lot more weight when it goes before the Supreme Court, because this is not just a random person filing the lawsuit. It's a former president of the United States who was censored while he was the president of the United States. And that's important because, he's a public official. And there have been lawsuits in the past that said, people need to have access to the Twitter feeds of public officials. So we'll see how that plays into it. But my, black-pilled pessimistic prediction is that it'll get shot down on 230 grounds.
I think actually it'll get shot down on let me just you were clear, and I should have offered you a cup. Can I get you something? So that I'm also clear, I represent Donald Trump. My firm represents Donald Trump. Not in that case. I think it's more likely that a judge will it's a class action, okay? Class action lawsuits have a very specific requirements that are usually the first thing that's litigated before there's even a motion to dismiss. There's usually a motion to challenge class certification, and that's what it comes down to. Here, frequently on Twitter, I spend some time on Twitter. People seem to be obsessed with this idea of class actions. Can we do a class, Ron? Can we do a class? And the answer is almost always no. And the main reason the answer is almost always no is that the harm suffered by all members of a class has to be more or less the same. Everybody was deprived. Everyone paid too much for this toaster. Everyone who bought this kind of tire experienced the same repair costs, et cetera, et cetera. Many people who have been censored by Twitter have gone on to happy and productive lives. And in fact, perhaps it's saved some of their lives. Other people have lost millions in income and career opportunities. And the idea that the president would be the lead, would be the class representative is, let's just say, fascinating, because his damages as a result of social media censorship are surely unique in the entire universe. So a judge might not even have to get involved with the Section 230 issues. And I haven't seen the complaint to get to deal with the class action issues first. You know, I don't know if you have any experience.
That makes sense. You know, I'll defer to your expertise on this. I'm not a lawyer, and you know, you and the Dillon Law Group have done incredible work, pioneering work on the tech issue. I remember the lawsuits you filed against the tech companies, the massive one against Google. So much material came out of that one. That was incredible. But you know the difficulties of these cases better than anyone. And, they are, and I think you pointed out some. You made your point about the Florida law was very important also, because Florida could have put this, and obviously there must have been political reasons why they didn't. And I see that you have asked repeatedly why didn't they pass the statute that would do the job, as opposed to what they did, which was, and plus the carve out for Disney, as I understand it. It was perplexing because Texas, of all the states, Abbott's criticized for being a cuck all the time, certainly more so than DeSantis. And yet the Texas bill, which by the way has not passed yet, not because of the Republicans, I would say, but because the Democrats walked out of the last session prematurely. But the law they have, they're proposing there, SB 12, that does regulate the tech companies like common carriers. So there's no reason not to just, copy that one in Florida.
And obviously that would be challenged, but at least now you're having a different challenge from the one that's been going on all along. I have written a couple of pieces arguing that what the tech companies do to users is a deceptive practice, and that the existing law of consumer protection, both the Federal Trade Commission Act, as well as what are called the little FTC Acts in the various states, which are slight variations of the FTC Act, are actually sufficient to deal with these violations. That it is when you induce someone to come onto a social media platform and say, spend a lot of time here, give us a lot of content, look at all this great stuff. We're going to give you a blue check. We're going to, power users and all that, and you provide value to them. And like a lot of judges get hung up on this idea that, well, you're not paying anything for it, so they have a right to screw you.
Right, and that's not true because you are paying in your personal data. I feel that
Data, well, data, I mean, data is how you're looking at it as a technologist. But
Yeah.
it is an investment of, it's reduced to data, but it's an investment of time, personality, reputation, all kinds of resources and goodwill. And it's not only my data, by virtue of my being on Twitter, who knows how many hundreds or thousands of other people are either on Twitter who otherwise wouldn't be, or who are spending more time on Twitter who would not be spending that time. So I'm giving to them. I'm the product, as they say, right?
Yeah, and social networks are built on those kind of network effects. I mean, when social networks go for new rounds of funding, the biggest question is your monthly active users. How many people do you have active on your platform every month? So your usage of the platform is giving value to Twitter, giving value to Facebook, allowing them to go and get more funding.
Now, Section 230 has two primary privileges that it grants to internet service providers, which I will tell you, as an early adopter, not the earliest possible adopter, but a pretty early adopter, on the internet in the 90s. And I remember when Section 230 was passed, I was astonished that courts were finding that companies such as, in those days, like, was it CompuServe? The early platforms were being treated as internet service providers. My impression had been reading the legislation, and I know that there are many people who have sworn on a stack of Bibles that I'm wrong about this because they were there at the founding and this is what it was. But I thought of bulletin boards, and I thought beyond, not upstream, but not downstream, but upstream. Internet server providers, a server farm, someone who basically provides logistical or functionality more than, because I used to work in the area of trademark enforcement, and we were always looking, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand. I'm not saying that you don't. You're always looking in economics for the deep pocket. And the problem with counterfeiting, and when online counterfeiting started in particular, is you can always find the people who are selling the stuff, but what you want to find is the people who are making it. And if you can't find that, you want to get the people who are distributing it. So we were very busy in the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, trying to figure out, could we stick the credit card companies with liability? And eBay was the flavor of the month then. Can we stick eBay with liability? And the Tiffany case, I thought, was very poorly reasoned, because it took this ridiculous approach, which said it would really cost a lot of money for eBay to regulate counterfeits, and that would be bad for their business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Section 2 is just this massive, massive gift to the tech companies, and the way it's written, you can sort of see the justification for it, and much of it is good. I think my opinion is the liability protection part of it is actually not that. You could argue it's a little extreme, but it's actually not that bad because it allowed free speech to flourish on the internet. The problem is it also allowed unchecked censorship, and that's been tested in court. It doesn't take away the shield from platforms that behave like publishers. And to go back to what you were saying earlier, the false advertising, deceptive trade practices. It's interesting that you mentioned CompuServe. I get into this in my book. Like, the World Wide Web it took off because of this idealistic vision that was a response to walled gardens like CompuServe. I think, like, a lot of younger listeners probably won't know that, CompuServe was like its own internet before the World Wide Web of browsers and Internet Explorer and Mozilla even existed. It was this online network all on its own. And, it was like a Facebook. It was tightly regulated in what you could not say. You couldn't just throw up your own website. It wasn't decentralized. It was very, very centralized. And the World Wide Web, as we know it today, with websites and search engines and all of these services, was created as the decentralized response to that. So the fact that it's being taken over by all of these companies who are now behaving exactly the same way that CompuServe behaved is just a complete reversal of the ideals on which the web was founded, and the ideals which the tech companies, Twitter, Facebook, and Google and YouTube subscribed to and advertised in their early stages. They advertised themselves as open platforms.
And the incredible cynicism of people who are involved in that, in the messaging on that, to pretend otherwise. You know, we would have no internet today if it were. Okay, all right, maybe that is kind of true, but look at the internet we have today. I mean, is this the only possible way that we can run things? Let's take a step back.
Yeah, no, it is CompuServe. It is AOL. It's exactly. It's gone exactly back to the point that the problem that the internet, that the World Wide Web, I should say, was created to solve. Yeah, I mean, you know, you get these ridiculous post hoc explanations, like Jack Dorsey saying that when Twitter VPs were calling Twitter the free speech wing of the free speech party, which the then CEO of Twitter endorsed, that was just a joke. Well, then why did the then CEO endorse it? And, you know, Google admitted to this. So we saw this. We saw the smoking gun document. I obtained this from a Google whistleblower back in 2018. It's called The Good Censor. 80 pages explaining how, published by Google's own researchers, their own internal research team, 80 pages explaining how the internet and Google and Twitter and Facebook have, quote unquote, shifted towards censorship. That's Google's words saying they shifted towards censorship. Google's, and this document also said that, you know, the internet, the World Wide Web, Silicon Valley companies were founded on the ideals of free speech, and they've shifted towards censorship. So they've admitted that they promised this vast expanse of unfettered freedom of expression to their users, and then went back on it. They've read an official document from Google admitting to it.
So right, so that is a sort of a deceptive practice in and of itself. So in other words, you're saying not only are you deceiving consumer by consumer on that investment point that I made, but also just the entire premise of the enterprise. I just want to focus a little bit, though, on Section 230, because, as you point out, there was this liability shield in Section C1, which basically says, and this again goes to our deep pockets issue in intellectual property, if someone torts you, someone commits a tort against you, pretty much defamation is what we're talking about, on your platform, we're going to treat you like a platform and not like a publisher, because otherwise no tweets are going to ever get, there won't be any tweets because someone's going to be vetting things all the time. It'll just be what the New York Times or New Yorker magazine want us to think they are.
Right.
But what everyone misses is that subsection C2 of Section 230 says that no provider, and this is really where they're hanging their hats, not on C1, and everyone's obsessed with this publisher and a platform distinction. It's irrelevant because the censorship problem is not.
It's in C2. Yeah, C2 is like the bad part of Section 230. That's what needs to be get rid of.
Well, but listen, but tell me what's bad about it. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on account of any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. That's probably the part that, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So that sounds like we can deplatform you. But listen, any action voluntarily taken in good faith.
That is a problem for them, isn't it? Good faith.
It hasn't been tested yet, and I haven't found the case yet where I can test it because there's always something else going on. But we're so past the ability, the point of proving good faith or proving bad faith. You know, the stack of exhibits you could show up with in court if we were still using paper to demonstrate all the imbalances, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, just in the past couple of weeks, I've seen people openly calling for, you know, more churches to be burned down in Canada. They've got this epidemic of church arson going on over there. openly posting that on Twitter, and there's almost no proactive action on Twitter's part to take any of that down.
No, I see. There could be something that will be achieved. See, I just listened to a little bit of the press conference, the former president's press conference, and he sounded like a person who had a degree of faith in the judiciary to right wrongs and to consider itself the righter of wrongs that I don't think he even really is. He described, I think, a legislative problem, a problem with the law.
Right.
Not a problem with how the law is being enforced. Although I do think many judges are defaulting to, I had a case where I was representing Laura Loomer in that same court, the Southern District of Florida, and a Trump-appointed judge, besides finding that Florida law, it was a claim against the Committee for American Islamic Relations, CARE, and we were claiming that they tortiously interfered with Laura's ability to make a living.
Oh yes, I remember that case actually. Yeah, that was a big one, and they unquestionably did.
Unquestionably, right. But Florida law happens to be kind of dicey with the precision with which you need to identify the the economic expectancy interfered with. And first of all, the judge said, there's no commercial relationship between her and Twitter. I said, that's funny. I think there's terms of use that Twitter would consider to be binding on Laura Loomer's. I mean, it's preposterous to say there's no business relationship.
Yeah, Trump-appointed judge said this.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to that in a second.
Yeah.
He also went on to say, as an alternative ground, I also hold, and even Eric Goldman, who is the Google professor over at Santa Clara Law School? Very, very bright guy, but who was really bought into this point of view that anything, Section 230 is this icon. Even he was astonished that this judge said, Section 230 is also meant to basically be this freedom for platforms, internet service providers to do whatever they have to do, to not be liable for anything. And even though it doesn't protect under its terms third parties, in other words, CARE is not an internet service provider. Right. He said it would still be applicable to CARE because things, okay?
It's just bizarre. CARE is protected from Section 230.
Yeah,
that's so strange.
Even Eric was astonished at that.
I have a question for you, and I think Lumo's made this argument in cases herself, that in a sense, what happens when the platform itself, I understand, it's perfectly reasonable for a platform not to be held liable for defamatory statements posted by users, but in some cases, the platform itself is now defaming people by saying you're hateful, you're racist, you're a dangerous extremist, et cetera, all these categories they have. So in that case, the platform itself is doing it.
Yes.
So how can Section 230 possibly protect that?
Well, right. So Laura did file those cases against Facebook, which deemed her to be a dangerous person.
Yes.
And I think she wasn't the right. That wasn't one of my cases. I don't think she was the right person for that case.
By the way, it's insane how this word dangerous and these words like extremist are being manipulated at the moment. That cover
safe. I don't feel safe.
I read this. Safe, yes.
I was listening to Ron Coleman's podcast and I didn't feel safe.
Yeah, we used to laugh at the social justice warriors on college campuses back in 2014 and 2015 when they all had Tumblr blogs and were posting on Reddit. Well, now they're running policy at the most powerful tech companies on the planet, and we're left dealing with the results.
The laugh is on us. But when I say that Laura wasn't the right person to bring it, I don't mean, unlike many of the people on the left and among libertarians who seem to believe that if you're a bad person or a person they don't like, you're not entitled to this. Like the old idea of neutral principles of law, that we should defend the Nazis' right to march in Skokie, is out the window. If you're a racist, if you're even white, I guess, you're not entitled to those sorts of rights. But what I meant is that Laura was sort of, in those cases, asking the court to say that there's an implication by the fact that I was banned by virtue of being dangerous, that I'm dangerous. And even if being dangerous is something more than just an opinion, which it may not be in this rhetorically charged environment, it's a number of steps that a judge is not going to want to take in this environment. But on the other hand, we filed suit in California on behalf of Brendan O'Handley, DC Drano, I'm sorry, that's the government action one. I'm sorry, we filed here on the East Coast. We sued Twitter in New York on behalf of James O'Keefe. I'm getting my O's, my Irish last names.
You've got too many lawsuits against the tech companies to keep track
of. Where they told reporters that James had been, they banned him, and then they said the reason they banned him was that he was using multiple fake accounts.
Right.
When in fact, that's not the case. He wasn't using multiple fake accounts, and he can prove it.
Of course.
So Section 230 should not help there, because now they're just a company defaming a person who's not even a customer anymore.
Yeah, and one of their biggest critics, a guy who's exposed them time and time again. I mean,
well, not only that, it was the same day. It was the same day that Project Veritas had tweeted criticism. It's secret camera recordings about a CNN producer acknowledging the kind of bias that is not necessarily all that shocking, but the coincidence was, impossible to ignore.
And I think there's like a deeper question here, isn't it? Because the abuses are so blatant and so in your face and so excessive. Banning a sitting president, banning a journalist who's criticizing your own company and publishing stories about your own company, banning politicians, political candidates like Laura Loomer, censoring political discussion, censoring news stories. The fact that the judiciary hasn't been able to deal with this, that Congress hasn't been able to deal with this, that the administration under Trump wasn't able to deal with this, there's a deeper question, is the American system capable of actually dealing with this problem? It certainly hasn't dealt with it so far.
It is capable of it, but the will is not there. Ironically, half of the political establishment believes very firmly that this distortion of discourse and commerce is working in their favor, and therefore it's okay. Unlike,
they don't think it's working in their favor enough. Certainly, the media companies think this. They've been pressuring Congress to pass this bill called the Journalism, Competition, and Preservation Act. Really, probably the worst bill I've seen come out of this Democrat Congress. And what it essentially would do, and by the way, it's not just left-wing media companies involved in this. News Corp's a big part of it as well. What the bill essentially would do is give the power of law to what the tech companies have been and media companies have been doing for the past 4 years, which is the former favoring the latter by boosting them in their algorithm, by paying them directly, by allowing media companies to form a cartel. It's going to give them an antitrust exemption to form a cartel for the sole purpose of pressuring tech companies for special favors. And that really shows you what they're after. They want control of the narrative. They want to be the top search results on every one of these platforms, and they want the platforms to pay them to prop up their failing business model.
And this is separate,
failing because no one trusts them.
Right, and that is separate from their own efforts without legislative help to target up and coming competitors. It was about a year ago that they went all in on OAN, and they focused on Jack Posobiec, who was there at the time. They couldn't get anything on him, and also the management there stood up with a little bit of spine, and they weren't impressed by that. But it's a given. They have entirely demonized and to some extent co-opted Fox, with a couple of notable exceptions. OAN and Newsmax and other up-and-coming outlets are under pressure. Like, they don't, the kind of things, you think of someone like Jeffrey Toobin, okay? Gets his job back on CNN, no problem. All these people who have the seamiest lives and who have been caught saying the most inappropriate things, all is forgiven, but the relatively conservative Just the News, Epoch Times, the relatively conservative, and Project Veritas, journalistic news and information competitors of the companies that are seeking additional privileges, can't hire anyone who ever jaywalked, at 3 a.m. in Minneapolis, because it's going to be a whole demonstration.
Yeah, and this just it underscores the fact that one side in America has all the powerful institutions and the other does not, and this is exactly what happens. You can't expect any other result. The only thing conservatives can do right now, I think, is, and they're not doing this, of course, is simply stick together and stop constantly attacking people to the right, because even if you disagree with the people on your right, there are 1,000 people on your left who are probably getting away with much, much worse because they have all these powerful institutions on their side.
And I also think, though, that the sort of monoparty establishment, monolithic corporate techno financial thing, that has all that power.
The cathedral, as some call it.
The cathedral, yes, that's something Michael Malice likes to, a term he likes to use, although it goes back further than Michael Malice. I think there's a growing perception among many people that they're not us, that they're one, we're not them and they're not us, and it is not being created for the benefit of anyone but the people who run it, and their offspring. And there's a different level of alienation, not just the polarization that we're seeing between the sides in the culture war, but there's a deep running mistrust and distrust of government and big institutions now. The cities are especially the major cities, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, they're going to hell. They're absolutely going to hell.
Yeah.
And
everyone's fleeing to the red states.
I do think there's a point where this stuff starts to feed back, even though we think that it's this tightly sealed system, that it's a closed system, and the more power they get, the more power they keep. It doesn't really work that way. Maybe I'm just a cockeyed optimist, but a few friends, a number of people, and I'm sure you have an opinion on this, I thought that the GameStop moment earlier this year was a fantastic reminder of just how many surprises there can be in store for the cathedral.
That's true, and it certainly there are two things that stood out to me. One is that the positive thing is that many people who are not that political suddenly got a glimpse of how corrupt the system is. That was one big thing. The other big thing is, again, despite all the internet censorship, despite the censorship of all these platforms, it's still possible for these massive movements to come out of left field and surprise the establishment. They haven't been able to get rid of that. They have made it much more difficult by censoring platforms like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and stopping people to stopping conservatives from having the kind of viral energy they had in 2016. But they can't get rid of it completely. The internet's still there fundamentally. Although you can't understate the damage that's been done either. I mean, if you look at the stats for conservative websites in 2016, Breitbart News, many other conservative websites, the Daily Caller, the Gateway Pundit, soaring. You look at the Google numbers, and virtually zero in 2020 compared to, I think it was something like a 99% reduction for Breitbart News alone, and similar numbers for other conservative websites in 2020 compared to 2016. That's entirely artificial. That's entirely on Google's part. It's not due to a decline in traffic on our part.
And yet we're living in a world where judges say it's mind-boggling to me that you see this written in opinions. There's no monopoly. You can't say Google has a monopoly because you could do a search on Bing.
Right. Doesn't work.
So this is a generation of judges who grew up or came of age after the great antitrust era, which was ending when I came into the legal profession. Very few of them really have a grip on it. They will take any opportunity they can to dismiss an antitrust claim on the grounds of market definition, and they don't really understand, or they pretend not to understand. I'm going to give them every benefit of the doubt because they're my bosses. But mostly because I really do think they really, most of them, believe it or not, most of them want to do the right thing. That market, the fact that you can posit an alternative to Google doesn't mean that Google is not involved in anti-competitive practices, and that it doesn't dominate the market, and that there aren't network effects, as well as all, the whole issue with the FTC, the acquisitions and mergers, so many moving parts here, and we've only just started talking, you and I. This is our introduction, right?
Yeah, we're 45 minutes in already.
We're 45 minutes in, and I don't ask my guests or my listeners to hang on for much more than that. So I appreciate your. This is really, to me, was just like two like-minded people just kvetching about all the stuff. Is there anything you're working on that you could tell us about that maybe people aren't paying attention to, as opposed to the stuff that everyone's paying attention to, that they want us to pay attention to, but we really should be looking at something?
One thing I haven't written any stories about yet, but I probably will in the near future, is all the stuff that's going on in the alternative tech world. Obviously, we've seen a bunch of pretty shoddy platforms thrown up that are basically clones of Twitter. But I'm very interested in the stuff that's going on currently in development, especially anonymous platforms. I think there's a lot of room to innovate in anonymous platforms. We haven't seen any innovation there since Reddit. And,
there's anonymity and portability, I think, are where people are focusing. Is this idea that you can get up and walk away, not only with your data, but with your network in some fashion, as if it were sort of modular. And some of the people that I've been talking to about this.
Yes, and your content, and that's very important. So hopefully we'll see more progress there.
Yeah. Now, my only problem with this discussion is, gosh, aren't we proving that there really isn't, maybe there isn't a monopoly, right? Maybe answer to that, you don't wait until 10 years of damage is done to businesses and to the social fabric, and to people can't even get bank accounts. People can't get bank accounts because of what a few people in Silicon Valley decide, or Beijing maybe, or Qatar, as they say. That's not how it's supposed to work. Antitrust injury takes place when it takes place. You don't wait. Yes, the market isn't instantaneous. The invisible hand takes some time, but the network effects that are in place now are going to be so difficult to unwind it. It was one thing when you had this vertical integration with, Ford Motor Company, where they were buying sheep so that they could have wool for the seats in the Model Ts. Okay, things moved at a glacial pace in those days. So if you waited 20 or 30 years before you started looking at market shares, you could unwind things. You could set up, you could break up companies. Now the damage is being done, as I said, not only economically and not only to competition, but to the social and consumer welfare. No one's doing anything about it. And if the Trump lawsuit at least shakes up some judge somewhere, and how they're going to get past the forum selection clause here, I'm not exactly clear. But if it ends up that at least, as you said in the very beginning, because Donald Trump is Donald Trump, that judges will be a little bit more careful before they write silly things. By the way, I have no reason to think they will. I mean, think of what the D.C. Circuit did to General Flynn.
Oh yeah,
shamelessly. Yeah. So I don't think there really is any embarrassment when they want to go there. They're going to go there.
It's hard to be optimistic when the system is so colossally effed. I'm not sure if you're allowed to swear on this podcast, but yes.
Yes, it is freaky crazy. Allum, thank you so much. I hope we have a chance to talk again. And it is really fascinating looking at your work. And, any way should we recommend that everyone should be following you on Twitter and reading you on Breitbart and pushing those Google numbers up so that they can then be manipulated. At least they have to do the work of manipulating them back down. Thanks a lot.
Well, great to be on the podcast.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye.